Hello, hello, hello again, and welcome back to another edition of Political Breakfast, heard right here on WABE. I'm Lisa Rayam, and with me is the entire gang. We got strategist Brian Robinson, Tharon Johnson, and our producer, Lily Oppenheimer. Happy Monday. Hello, hello, hello to all of you.
Hey there. I'm in a particularly chipper mood this Monday. Tharon knows why, because he was with me. It is so great to not only be an SEC champion as Georgia
Oh my
Bulldogs,
gosh, you want to talk about those Bulldogs?
Against Alabama, our mortal enemy who had beaten us 10 of 11 times. So I think Tharon was witnessing me go through this cathartic moment. I don't know that he knew that's what was happening, but I had just had my heart ripped out and stomped on so many times through the years by Alabama in the worst possible ways, the worst possible losses.
Yeah.
And to go in and just boat race them was thrilling from usually we're like behind until the fourth quarter, then we come back and punch you in the face. And they never had a chance. I mean, we had them by the throat the whole game.
Yeah, we were just talking. That's so odd because the tide does turn in college football, but you don't expect it to turn when it comes to Alabama and Georgia. You expect those to remain two really, really competitive teams, and Alabama just did not look like Alabama of old at all.
No, and listen, a lot of us were okay with not having to have to play in the SEC championship. I can't speak for B-Rob, but I was totally okay with the Dogs getting that first round bye. If we didn't make the SEC championship, totally fine. Because one of the things that I was afraid of is to relive what B-Rob just talked about, and that is, you know, I've been probably at 6 or 7 of those Alabama games, at least 6 of them, including the national championship in Indianapolis. And, you know, that one turned out well, but all the others, I mean, were bad outcomes. And so I don't know what was wrong with Alabama, and they're still going to the playoff, which I won't even go into the college football ranking system here. But
isn't it weird this year?
Yeah. But, you know, Dogs are in. They got to buy. And correct me if I'm wrong, B-Rob, it's Sugar Bowl. I'm sure you already got your I'm sure you got your ticket already. You know, y'all get those secret emails, you know, before all of us get them, before y'all got like a special code for special rate.
We do a special code. If the code comes,
there you go. See, Lisa.
The code comes with you sending them a lot of money. That is the secret handshake. Is you hand them cash and then you get emails giving you access.
Georgia Tech. I've talked about Georgia Tech all season. They went to the Pop-Tart Bowl in Orlando.
I am so disappointed with that.
Seems like they deserve something a little more worthy.
They do. And I'm just happy they didn't do what Notre Dame did, which is, you know, we're going to take our ball and go home and not even go to a bowl. But no, shout out to all the Georgia Tech players, the student athletes, the coaching staff. They had a wonderful year. I mean, it didn't end the way that they wanted it to, but they definitely deserve a better bowl.
Yeah. Now, I think the Pop-Tart Bowl is excellent. I enjoy watching it. I like seeing the Pop-Tart mascot come out of a giant toaster. It's a spectacle unlike any other in college bowl season.
If we could, before we start, there was a headline that caught me off guard in the AJC today. It says, Falcons Arthur Blank has become bad franchise owner. I mean, is it really his fault that the Falcons are doing so bad? I mean, he is the franchise owner, right? But he's not the coach.
Yeah, I think the thing is, for me as a lifelong Falcons fan, right, I don't always like how they make moves. And, you know, when I saw the general manager at the SEC championship, he was walking around with, I think it's his son. And, you know, and I was behaving. B-Rob can tell you I had a few tequila, so I was feeling it pretty good. But I think what really is troubling about this franchise is that it is not all Arthur's fault. All right. It's not. Like, he has put together a outstanding team of leaders to lead this franchise. But, you know, one of the things that came to me is, like, if we're going to really go through this, Rich McKay, who we remember was revered and came from Tampa, is really not even that involved with the operations on the football side, but he's doing a wonderful job of representing, you know, the Blank Foundation and the sports entity. But Lisa, I think that our general manager has put together a pretty good team. what I think is happening is the culture in that locker room clearly does not translate to winnable outcomes on the field. And what do I mean by that? If you look at the Falcons, there's just really no dog in them. There's no fight. There's no continuity. There's no consistency. And so it does start with the coaches, and we got the talent. And so now I think that, honestly, we as Falcons fans, we're calling out everybody from Arthur on down. But it's not all Arthur's fault. A lot of critics have been very vocal about Raheem. Not necessarily that he's a bad coach. You have to remember he's in his second year. But you got to show some emotion, man. You got to show got to show you're a little pissed. You got to throw a hat down or, cut somebody out on the sideline or something. But it's just like when we win and it's just no emotions and the excuse is we got to do better. We got to do better. I think now people are starting to turn to Arthur Blank. Why? Because he is the leader and the face of this franchise. But it's not all his fault. And I think that the voices will become more and more critical of him, the GM, and the head coach, and the coordinators if we continue to lose the games the way we're losing them. Not so much like we're losing. I mean, that's bad. But it's the way that we're losing those games. And I think that a lot of fans, including myself as a season ticket holder, is very, very upset about the outcome.
So I went Sunday to the game, and we went because we are Corgi owners, and they had the annual Corgi race at halftime. So Quinn, my daughter, wanted to go there for that. So we went to watch the dogs. Well, I guess for the second day, we saw the dogs win, even though we saw the Falcons lose. The Corgi race was sadly the highlight of the entire day. And one thing a wise man said to me very recently, somebody that has a long history of football lineage and personal experience himself, you can tell a great coach by if their team is better at the end of the year than they are at the beginning. And if they are way better, you have an extraordinary coach. And this guy was telling me this about Kirby Smart. And I think that's something to look at here. What I saw Sunday was a team that's deteriorated since the beginning of the season. Yes, we've lost our quarterback. We've lost our top receiver. Those are important. Those should be calculated. But the team looked abysmal Sunday. Special teams, disasters. The offense was feckless. I don't know what needs to change, but something is broken there. And I don't know. I'm not smart enough to tell you who's to blame, but we're going to need changes before next year.
All right. Well, our fingers are crossed for our Falcons for sure. Let's talk politics. The last time we talked, it was a runoff election day, and one of the interesting races was out in Roswell. Roswell has a new mayor, Mary Robichaux, a former state representative. Any thoughts on that upset in Roswell? Tharon, you first.
Well, if you look at it, it's being sort of portrayed, and it should be, that former state representative Mary Robichaux, who I actually had the pleasure of working with when she was in the legislature, she lost her race, correct me if I'm wrong, B-Rob, to Scott Hilton. And Hilton is a rock star Republican who I like. We don't always agree policy-wise, but he's very responsive. And we've worked together on some things, and was a good guy. But the thing that's really interesting is that was a closely watched race. And so I just want our listeners to know that Mary was defeated because she just ran up against a lot of money in the Republicans. I think B-Rob probably was somewhere in the back writing those op-eds and mail pieces, going after her. That's what he does so well. So what I've been told from some Roswell residents is that you did have Democrats win the council. This was a mayor and Kurt Wilson, Lisa, who had been dealing with a lot of controversy. And it also kind of starts with not getting support for his own council members who came out against him. But it's also about these trees. And we've said on this podcast a long time, you start cutting down people's trees or start getting into tree debates in certain cities, if you start putting lights in certain places or removing lights, you're going to get beat. And so I think it was just a combination of Mary's hard work, a very disciplined campaign. Even though she was a Democrat in a nonpartisan Roswell mayor's race, she said, I wanted to work with everyone. Yes, she did have Democrats come out and support her, but she did not scare the Republicans to the point where they wanted her not to win. And you had some turnover on the council, too. And so there were some city council members who are Democrats, again, in a nonpartisan race, but we know through voting records and their activities that they won. And so that one, honestly, was an upset. A bigger upset would have happened in Sandy Springs, which I know we're going to talk about later. But Roswell definitely winning with Mary is a tremendous amount of boost and momentum from Democrats. And it shows you that these cities like Roswell and others are changing.
Yeah, expound on that, Brian, because Kurt Wilson was endorsed by Brian Kemp.
Yeah, well, we saw the races in Sandy Springs and Roswell become partisanized to some degree, though Sandy Springs less so because, of course, Rusty Paul, who was a former state Republican senator, a former state Republican Party chairman, won by a massive margin. And as he said in his post-election win, a lot of that came from Democrats voting for him. And which is the only way you can win in Sandy Springs, which Kamala Harris won by, I think, about 23 points. So that's a big, big Democrat advantage there in the city of Sandy Springs. So Rusty Paul was very much campaigning on nonpartisan issues, boasting of his Democratic support and bipartisan support. And he started talking very much about very small local issues. Like it is like the nuts and bolts of city government. And so he didn't want to make it about any social issues, anything that is overly polemic. It was very much like you want good zoning, you want good local decision making, you want investments in our community, parks, that kind of stuff. That's what Rusty Paul did. That's the right way to go if you are a Republican running for a nonpartisan race in Sandy Springs. I don't think the Roswell race was overly partisanized because what really happened there is what Tharon said. It was also over very local issues. Mayor Wilson faced headwinds because they cut down some trees at a historic mansion or home there that is city owned, and people really mobilized around that local issue. So I don't think it had anything to do with Wilson being endorsed by Brian Kemp and Robichaux being a known Democrat. This had to do with a local issue. And Tharon's right. You know, in that situation, Roswell probably is, like a lot of these highly educated, wealthy enclaves in Atlanta, becoming more blue. That is the pattern that we have seen happening. But there are also folks who can still be scared by the radical fringes of the Democratic Party. And of course, Mayor-elect Robichaux did a good job of making sure that that wasn't the profile that she put forward. Like she didn't scare anybody. That's the word that Tharon used, and it's a word that I use a lot too. Don't scare the opposition because that's going to mobilize them. And so kudos to her for running a good campaign and winning there. But I don't think that it had to do with partisan politics in either case. In the Sandy Springs case, I think that Dontaye Carter, who lost to Mayor Paul, did scare people. And he had some high-profile, well-known Democrat names, Stacey Abrams, but also Representative Sanchez from Smyrna, who's a Democratic socialist. So he had some people around him that normal Democrats probably saw as radical and out of line and not what they wanted for their city.
All right. Any other races stand out to you? The results from last week's runoff that really piqued your interest, Tharon?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that for all my Democratic listeners, and I got to do this, Lisa, I don't want our listeners to underestimate and don't understand what happened in Roswell. This was a complete blue flip. Former State Representative Mary Robichaux did definitely run a very moderate campaign that had Democratic support. But if you look at what happened on the city council, that's an indicator that there are folks who live in the metro area that will vote for Democrats. And I think Dontaye Carter, he's not gone forever. I think he's done a tremendous job of focusing on community issues. And so it'll be very interesting to see what his sort of advocacy role looks like in Sandy Springs going forward. And correct me if I'm wrong, B-Rob, Rusty Paul has already said this time again that he's not going to run for office. And so it'll be a very competitive mayor's race in Sandy Springs in 4 years.
What? Yeah. Rusty Paul's going to call it quits after this. Wow. We'll see. After a long, long run, right? Last time we talked, this also was a development last week, and we haven't touched on it yet. But what are your thoughts about Fulton taxpayers and how they may have to foot, I think it's $10 million bill after the case against President Trump was dropped in Fulton County? Any thoughts on that?
It could be way more than that. It could be way more than 10
You think
billion.
so?
Yeah. Well, they're estimating that that's kind of the bottom end of what it could be. It could be $10 to $20 million. And of course, the judge Judge McAfee's going to be able to take a look and see what he thinks is reasonable. So maybe he can make sure there's not a bunch of fluffing going on there in the legal bills. But this is a subject where I have been a little bit on the outside of my own party on this. This was a law that was passed in the last year that allows you to reclaim legal cost if the prosecutor is found to have acted inappropriately in some way. And in this case, of course, Fani Willis was taken off of the case for many of these defendants because of her relationship with Special Prosecutor Nathan Wade. This bill got passed only because the state house, had some great legislation that the Senate had been bottling up. And so they knew the Senate would pass the bill that required covering the legal fees. So they attached a bill that established a board to compensate the wrongfully convicted, people who have served decades on death row or in prisons for crimes that they did not commit. And these are very serious crimes for which they were convicted. And so the board will compensate them for the time that they have lost in prison. Of course, nothing can give those years back, but these folks come out in their 40s, 50s, and 60s with nothing to their name, no Social Security, no job skills. And so it was really important to get that board passed. And the state Senate had to pass it because they wanted to pass this bill that allowed for the legal fees particularly, it was very plainly about the Fulton County case against the alternate electors and President Trump. I do think that they were making a political point here. I think a lot of Republicans wanted there to be a fight against Fani Willis. It's difficult for the legislature and the governor's office on the state level to get involved in a local prosecution. There wasn't a lot of jurisdiction there. So they looked for ways where they can weigh in to show Republican voters, hey, we're fighting back. We know that this is unjust. We know this is a bad prosecution, that this is inexcusable. And this was a way to show Republican voters that they too were angry and wanted to, lay down a marker. I do think that we need to take another look at this moving forward. The point has been made, but I think this is one where we're going to see unintended consequences at some juncture in the future. I think Fani Willis was wildly wrong to approach this case the way that she did, and I've been very clear and very consistent. The RICO case was an overreach. The alternate elector prosecutions were an absurdity and a miscarriage of justice. They did not break any laws. They did not engage in a giant conspiracy. It was all crap. And the process, in the end of the day, proved me right on that. But I think we're going to get into a really, really tricky entanglement sometime in the future. And I don't think that Fulton County taxpayers should be picking up the tab here when they've got to probably spend over $1 billion on a new jail over the next decade. They got some big expenses coming in Fulton County, right? So it's sad. But this is a situation, though, of bad choices because it's not fair to these defendants either. They were spending hundreds of thousands, maybe in some cases millions of dollars, defending themselves against lawfare, against an unjust, unreasonable prosecution, as determined by the prosecuting attorney's council leader, Pete Scandalakis. So it is two wrongs here, and that's a difficult situation.
It's a political mess, isn't it, Tharon? It's just turned into a political mess for everyone involved, it seems.
Yes, it is a political mess because I want to make sure I don't misquote Brian. And I thought, by the way, brother, you did a good job of analyzing how that bill even became a thought and how it ultimately became law. You sound like a damn good lobbyist that maybe have worked on this a little bit. But I want to make sure.
I worked on the good part for free.
Yeah. All right, there we go. There we go. I'm just saying, boy, you was good. I had no critiques in a bad way. But Lisa, the timing of the introduction of this legislation was, correct me if I'm wrong, B-Rock, keep me honest here, was by former state senator Brandon Beach,
Treasurer of the United States, TOTUS.
Now the treasurer who's the money man, right? And a Trump loyalist who's not been called a traitor yet, but Trump loyalist, right? he came back at a time where he knew that he had to continue to carry the water for Donald Trump. So letting our listeners know. So he floated this idea of the bill. But what B-Rob just did is that took us into how things really work down in the Capitol. And that is, in order for the Senate to get what they wanted, the House had to get what they wanted. And I want to make sure I'm hearing you correctly here, B-Rob. You're saying at a time where you are a Fulton County taxpayer, just like me, that we need a new jail. I agree with you on that. That maybe we should not be spending all of the money that could be spent based on the state law to go to these defendants. But you're saying, do you think they deserve something? But maybe the $10 million is just scratching the surface. It actually could be higher than that.
Tharon, I think the answer to your question is there's no good answer, because I do think these people who've had to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars out of their own pockets have been put in a ridiculously bad situation. It is a miscarriage of justice that is happening to them. At the same time, I don't think that the people of Fulton County are to blame for what Fani Willis did herself. I do think that Fulton County should punish her by making sure she's not reelected ever again. I think what she did in this case was so egregious that it should end her political aspirations moving forward. And but it's very difficult to be a prosecutor with this hanging over your head if there's ever a case that's going to be somewhat controversial in the future. And of course, some prosecution in the future is going to be controversial. It's going to have two competing sides. It may not be Republicans and Democrats in the future. It may be some other two groups. I don't know what to do. I don't know that there's a fair resolution for the defendants and for the taxpayers of Fulton County.
So, Lisa, where I want to kind of wrap this up is that even this conversation between me and B-Rob is where I think some people are. Now, let's make sure that we understand what's really going on here. What former State Senator Brandon Beach and others, now Treasurer of the U.S. Treasury, they were coming into the session, Lisa, with as much red meat as we possibly can. We talked about in this podcast, you were talking about punishing Fani Willis. We were talking about transgender sports. We were talking about all these cuts, with rural hospitals. We were still talking about voting. We were talking about a dysfunctional state elections board. I mean, these were all things just a little less than a year ago, now going into the session that was there. And so I'm very proud of Brian to really, again, take us through how this happened, because there had to be some indication for the Republicans that this case, based on this, situation at the time with the personal conduct, the inappropriate personal conduct by District Attorney Fani Willis and Nathan Wade, that they felt they had a damn good shot to get this case kind of thrown out. I do push back respectfully on Brian to say that I think that this prosecutor, Fani Willis, who, by the way, was reelected by her peers with almost 3/4 of the vote, people felt like she did her job, which is you had 19 people who were indicted, 3 of whom pled guilty, 1 of whom was at the time former President Donald Trump, now President Donald Trump. And so there was definitely enough evidence that was presented in order for this case to go on. Now, Brian has been emphatic that he did not like the charges that was brought up and all that, and we can argue that for another day. So I think the taxpayers of Fulton County, Lisa, probably need a little bit more education on this, because if you just hear the Republicans talk about it, is that she was wrong, she should have never prosecuted this case in the first place, and now y'all gonna have to pay tens of millions of dollars for it. What I think Funny needs to say, or should be saying, is I did my job based on the prosecutorial restraints and guidelines that I've been given as a district attorney of Fulton County. Everyone had due process. I brought up the evidence. A grand jury of their peers decided that we need to move forward on an indictment. And I think she also needs to probably say, had this case not been derailed by her personal conduct, which was inappropriate, I think this would have probably went on to have a little bit more merit and a little bit more facts that were actually presented before the president was reelected. But once the president got reelected, then pretty much the writing was on the wall. I mean, this case is going to go away.
So in your opinion, as Brian indicated, will this kill her career? Her political career?
I think, no, I don't think it kills her career. I do think that you have to listen to. I've learned very quickly, Lisa, to listen to what Republicans tell you on and off the air in Georgia. And B-Rob saw us. We were at the game, saw a particular state representative who saw us together, and he said, "Y'all behave." B-Rob was in the front, Lisa, no shock, and he's front row. I was back there with the people. All the black and brown people.
With you, Brian, because he sounds like you get supreme everything.
Oh man, Lisa,
false?
Lily, y'all should have saw. Front row. Arms folded, crisp UGA belt, a shirt design I never seen before. Karina was looking like, had her little first lady look going on, all black. You talking about. They were on it. But I was back there with the people, Lisa. Back there with the people, conversing with the folks, in the back, being a man of merit. But I don't think this kills her political career. I think it forces her to really think about what her future looks like in politics. I would not be surprised that you ask many people, Fonnie Willis is a damn good prosecutor, right? In this case, you can definitely say she did some things right. You can say she did some things wrong. How things happen on the commission in Fulton County. The sheriff continued to, that's my guy, continue to try to have some resistance from them. And if people start to think that we need an overall change or there's going to be a lot of back and forth elections, then she's got to really calculate, does she want to even be in this position anymore? So I think it's very hard to unseat an incumbent. And more importantly, it's who they decide to run against her. If they put up a Republican in a Fulton County Democratic stronghold like we've seen, things should be very hard to beat. So I do think that there will be a lot of people talking about running against her, but I think that it doesn't kill her political career, but she definitely got to continue to make sure that she communicate with the people so she can get reelected again if she decides to run.
Yeah. And Tharon's right. We do respectfully disagree on sort of the merits of the prosecution. One thing I want to remind folks of is that on the show, another area where Tharon and I disagreed, and this has been a couple of years ago now, was about whether or not President Trump should have to go in for a mugshot as a former president of the United States. And I said, this will be disastrous for them doing it. That there will be a consequence for this. Now that mugshot hangs in the West Wing of the White House as a statement of resilience and fight that we've overcome this deep state prosecution, right? It was clear to me that should never have happened, and I think history has proven me right on that.
Brian Robinson, Tharon Johnson have spoken this week. More developments to come, of course, and we'll check back in soon. Thank you all for joining us, and have a great week.
Bye, guys.
Have a great week, and shout out to South Fulton and East Point. They elected new mayors and new council members.